Kara, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
There's so much I could go into, and I didn't even, within that intro, didn't even really give much away of what we're really here to talk about, but it all kind of interconnects in some way or another.
Yes, for
I'm
sure.
excited. And I think your story of what you are currently struggling with and your story of things you've overcome, these are things that a lot of people go through and a lot of people deal with. And I say deal with, but I think a lot of people that I know personally like have anger issues or have dealt with loss of loved ones and still don't really know how to deal with it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of anger out there right now.
Sh-
Things are rough.
I mean, me myself, I'm like, the tiniest thing could trigger me. And it's like, how do I manage this? I've gotten better
Yes.
over the years, but my God, it's
Yes. And the internet, social media has made it like so much more. It's hard and it's hard to be like, hang on, I don't have to be mad about this when we feel like like the world is so unjust and like we feel so irritated about it. Like we have good platforms and reasons to be mad. So it's really hard to learn
well.
how to pull it back and do good things.
And I find like I've done a lot of self-help work. I'm very into that world. And you think you're so figured out and like ready to handle anything. And then someone hit that trigger. You're like, no. It's like
Yeah.
all of the work you've done goes out the window.
Oh, for sure. So I have been doing great and I have a ton of anger issues. I'm a little bit addicted to anger. I have all of this stuff. I've been working so hard on it for the last 4 years. And we had family photos on Monday and like everything went to crap, and there's just like, there is no perfect in all of it. And you try to be better and do better. And that's the best that anyone can do because I teach this and I have been working so hard on it and everything just goes out occasionally and you start over and it's totally fine.
Family photos bring out the worst in people. Oh,
For sure.
I have so many childhood stories, dare I say traumas from family photos. Now, do you have kids?
It was my whole family. So it was like my parents and my 6 siblings and their kids and my kids. And
Whose
so
idea was this?
it was my idea.
Oh,
So
shit.
it was a bad plan.
Have
Whatever.
you
I'll
gotten the
move
photos
on.
Yeah. back?
Yeah, most of them are okay. We're gonna be okay. We're healing. We're all over it. Well, I'll move forward. But stuff happens. It
Everyone's ready to
happens.
burn them.
Yeah, we move on.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, my God. Okay. So when I asked you, and I always ask all my guests, what are you struggling with currently and what have you overcome recently? And when I asked you, what are you struggling with currently, it was really interesting to me that you mentioned something that happened 4 years ago, but yet you're saying, I'm still struggling with it currently. That's relatable. And if you want to tell people a little bit about what happened 4 years ago and kind of why you're still struggling with it today.
Yeah, sure. I'll probably cry. We'll all stay
Okay.
together. So 4 years ago and like 3 days ago, one of my very best friends killed herself. She battled depression almost her whole life. We used to skip school together on the days she just couldn't function anymore. I kind of held myself as like the person for a long time that was supposed to keep her alive. And yeah, about 4 years ago, she drove up the mountain and she killed herself. And it is rough. It's always rough. It's hard when people die. I personally feel like it's especially hard when that's how they go. I mean, it's just kind of really like heart wrenching and rough.
The one interesting thing that you just said, you felt like you were the person that had to save her or had to kind of keep it together. Why is it just you feels that way? Or like, why are you taking it all on? Or why did you take it all on?
I'm happy you asked that question because I do feel like that specifically is the problem with mental health right now is that the caretakers, the people who love them, take on all of it alone. I mean, I was 12. I was 12 when she first tried to kill herself. That doesn't make any sense at all. Then I felt like I had to take that on alone. But I did because I guess you're kind of afraid to tell other people. You're afraid to be like, I need to talk to your mom. I need to reach out. I need more support. We need a team. And so you just take it on because it kind of feels like almost a secret, almost like something sacred that you have to take on for them. And I think it's a hole in our I don't want to say healthcare, but like I think it's a hole in our care for people who are struggling. Is the caretakers feel like they have to take it all on.
I think adults forget how young this starts with kids. Like
For
this
sure.
feeling of depression or anxiety or just like not feeling comfortable in your skin. And I say that because I'm not surprised that you said this started at 12 years old. I remember being, yeah, grade 5. So I remember being 10, 11, 12 years old and girls cutting themselves. But when I think like I'm only 28 years old now and I think about like a 9, 10, 11, 12 year old, I'm like, you're so tiny. Like you're such a kid. But back then, like life feels real. Like it's
Yeah.
not surprising that's happening that young. And I agree with when you're that age, you feel like asking for help is almost telling on them and getting them in trouble. Or it's
Yes.
like, no, they're
So
already in trouble. Like they're going through something really horrific.
yeah. So when she first tried to kill herself, she took a whole ton of pills. In the end, as an adult now, I don't actually think the pills that she took would have killed her, but I was 12 and I was sure she would die. Right. And so I did tell someone, I told our school counselor, and they talked to her parents. And she didn't talk to me for weeks and weeks and weeks. But for me, I didn't feel like I had a choice. But after that, how can you reach out? How can you feel like you have support when like the adults never came back and talked to me ever? They were like, thank you for this information. Go back to class. And I'm like, oh, okay.
There's a
And then she
broken
doesn't
loop
talk.
there.
Yeah. And then she doesn't talk to me for 3 weeks. So I feel like I can't tell. Like, are the adults mad at me? Is her mom mad at me? Are my parents mad at me? Or that, and you're 12. Like, what do you do? Except keep the secret and try to do what you can.
Well, you said keep the secret. Do you think being that age, you think, okay, I thought I was doing something right, but the proof is there. My best friend is not talking to me anymore. Her parents are not talking to me. No one's telling me anything. So why would I tell again?
Yes, exactly.
So you start harboring those secrets like anytime, and over 17 years, it got worse and worse.
Yeah,
Oh,
for sure. And it's rough and it's hard. And I understand like the adults, as an adult now, I understand them being like, of course, we're not going to keep adding stress to her life and things like that. But of course, it wasn't a one and done either. When somebody's struggling with depression, it's not just like if we ignore it, it goes away, or if we don't talk about it, it's not there. So,
and back then, I don't think anyone was talking about mental health or anything. So when you look back, even as she was growing up, going through junior high and high school, what were people doing to help her? Anything? There's not really
um,
many resources or tools back then, if I remember.
no, I'm
You go to
trying to
family
think.
therapy and that's about it.
Yeah, so there was some therapy. We had a school counselor who was pretty good when we were in middle school. And she spent a lot of time in his office, and he was just trying to be a good support for her. Most of her friends and my friends were like, "She is being dramatic. She just wants attention. Stop giving her attention." But like, how desperate do you have to be to do something like that just for attention? Like, let's just look at that. Like, obviously, there's something wrong if you have to cut yourself or try to kill yourself or whatever else just to get the attention that you need, right? Her parents did eventually send her off to like a mental health home. We didn't know what happened. She's disappeared for like a year almost.
And
Like
that's so
we had,
confusing. Like
it
you're still like a
was,
teenager.
yeah, we were like 15 when she left and she was just gone. And like her boyfriend didn't know where she was. I didn't know where she was. Her other best friend didn't know where she was. She was just missing for like almost a solid year. When she came back, it was super good for her to be there. But for the rest of us, we still didn't know what was next. We still don't know how to help or if we're hurting things. Like, who knew there should be communication with a kid's friend? But there should be, because obviously we love her and we want what's best for her, but we were not part of the loop to know what to do at all.
I mean, as kids, you know so much about each other. Like that age, you tell your friends everything. Like
For
that's who you
sure.
confide in. So if anyone kind of knows what's going on currently, it's you guys. But then when something happens to her and you guys not being told kind of any updates, it's like this is a big miss.
Yeah, for sure. And I can see a little bit why, like, they're like, of course, we're not going to reach out to her friends and include them in some stuff. Like, as an adult now, I can see how you miss that. But like, life is real no matter what age you are. And
Mhm.
the issues that you're having at that age are still like a really, really big deal and they should be taken seriously. And we were just kind of left to hopefully figure it out and I don't know, do our best, I guess.
How old was she when she took her life?
So she was older. She wasn't we weren't in high school anymore or anything like that. She would have been about 28.
My age.
Yeah, so she got married and then divorced. Somehow in my head, I thought that the getting married and the moving on with life was like almost a cure all, which maybe a lot of us believe that sometimes that it gets better just because we get a job or get married or have a baby or whatever. But it wasn't better for her, obviously. Then she had 2 kids and she moved back home. She had a good job. She had a really good job for stuff through school. And she was just going through the motions. She was just doing the stuff, and again, we had no network, support team for her, so, like, by then, I'd done all the research for suicide awareness, like, I'd taken the courses, I'd done all the stuff, I'd done everything, but it's hard to see the signs when it's just you,
Exactly.
and if her friends and I or her parents and I had been talking, if any of us had been talking and been like, "Hey, have you heard from her today? Because she just came in and was, like, super happy and giving me a hug and, like, super out of character, and they're like, "Oh, she just called me and I haven't heard from her in 3 months." You know, if we would've talked to each other, I think we could have seen the signs, but again, we just kept each person who loved her, like, in their own little isolation of her issues, and, yeah, it didn't work out great for any of us.
It almost sounds like you all have a puzzle piece to one big puzzle and you're not putting the puzzle together.
Yes, I think that's a great way to say it, and it never would have occurred to me that that should have happened until she killed herself, until she died. And I'm just reeling and trying to figure out what we could have done. And as people are coming out of the woodwork and being like, oh, because that's a huge sign of suicide, of like, this is like real and it's going to happen and you need to be aware of it, is if they get like really happy suddenly, if they're giving things away, if they're calling up people that they haven't talked to in a long time because they're saying goodbye. Right. And it's very real and it's them kind of tying up loose ends. And so as people are coming out of the woodwork and they're talking to me and they're telling me, oh, the last time I talked to her this, the last time I talked to her this, I was like, oh my gosh, it was all in our faces, but none of us talked to each other. So why would we know that?
What I find so interesting is that you've taken all of these suicide awareness and prevention courses, but it was still, I don't want to say shock, but you still didn't really see the signs. Why do you think that is? Do you think you were just blind to it?
I think it's hard if you're not with them all the time. You know, when we're hanging out that often. And I think it feels so good to see the person that you love struggling feel good. And so they come in and they're feeling happy and they're feeling good and they just wanted to say hi and they just wanted to hug you. And you're like, oh, I'm so happy. They might be doing better. They tried a new treatment and things might be happening. And let's give them a couple days. And like, didn't even cross my head. I've done the research. I've done the courses. I know it. And she came to my office 2 days beforehand. I wasn't there. She texted me. We talked for a while. She said she was feeling well. And I thought, I am so happy that she is feeling better. Never crossed my mind. We're just so happy that people are doing better that it's easy to miss. I mean, I think that's mostly it, is it's just we want them to be happy so badly. We want them to feel good so badly.
Do you think she knew how much you all cared?
I think she felt like a burden.
Mm.
She was very loving and she was very kind and she always remembered like birthdays and babies and all of those things that a lot of us forget, especially as we grow up and we leave high school and we have our own crazy busy lives. She didn't forget those things. She always remembered them. And she always called me if something was wrong. And I think she knew. I mean, she had like a 2 year old. Like a 2 year old loves you. It's just part of innately who they are. Like that. But I think when people get stuck in that suicidal thought process, it's I'm a burden, but I'm keeping these people that love me from growing. I'm keeping them from moving on. I'm keeping them from being better. I'm wasting their time, etc.
Was she taking like because she was dealing with depression, right?
Yeah.
Was she taking any like type of medication or anything to kind of keep it at bay or to manage it?
Yeah. So last I knew, she was on antidepressants and they weren't working anymore. She's been on antidepressants for for years and they weren't working anymore. So she went up to a hospital in Salt Lake and they did electroshock therapy treatment, whatever that is. I don't know but a lot
Whoa.
about it. She was there for a while. She was feeling good while she was there and she came home and she crashed super hard. And she contacted her doctors and they're like, wait it out. It's normal. This happens. She talked about it on her Facebook. People were like supportive and kind. I don't know if anyone went to her house. We went to take her stuff and we couldn't find her. She wasn't home. And then like 2 days later, she was saying she was doing great. I mean, that's when she was in my office telling my mom how happy she was. And we were like, oh, it's worked. It's helping. It's fixing things. And then it was like the next day, 2 days after that, that she killed herself. And so like she was there, she was getting help. She was trying so hard and it just wasn't enough for her. Her brain just couldn't see something better. I feel like the electroshock treatment was like kind of the last resort that she was clinging to, that I have to get better. And then it wasn't helping. And I don't know that she had any hope to feel any better.
I've heard so many people say this. I've lost family members to suicide before, and I've heard a flippant remark where some people say suicide is a very selfish way to go. I don't agree with that. I'll say that now. But what are your thoughts on that? Because obviously people are saying that is it's a bit of an ignorant type of thing to say.
I also think it's an ignorant type of thing to say. I had a friend in high school she's really like direct, almost to a fault. And that's what she said is I started texting people. I'm looking for like stories or pictures or just like to tell them what happened and kind of looking for support myself. And that friend texted back about how incredibly selfish and awful it was of her. And she has a family and she has kids and how could she do that to people? And kind of like an I told you so almost about it. And I was furious because I don't believe that people who are in that state that they would take their own lives are like, that doesn't make any sense to me. That how is that a selfish act? That's such a horrible thing to do. And I don't see the selfish part of it as like it's more of a desperation to me. And I truly believe like when she talked about it beforehand, and I have family members who have depression and suicidal thoughts sometimes too. And when they talk about it, it's I'm holding people back. And they're doing almost a service sometimes in their head. They think in their head that everyone's better off without them. It's not them being selfish. I don't believe that even a little bit. That
Like
makes
quite the opposite.
no sense. For sure. I really think most of them believe they're doing something better for the people that they love. Even though we don't feel that way, they're so in their heads about it. I don't think that they can see anything different.
Breaks my heart so much. Like to
Same.
anyone who's lost anyone to suicide, it's so heartbreaking. Because I mean, you're sitting here in front of me a little over 4 years later, and the emotions are still very real. You know, the guilt, the blame, the anger, of course. But how do you finally get rid of that guilt and blame and the what ifs or what could I have done? I'm sure that still racks your brain today.
Yeah. So I found out from her cousin. Her cousin Facebook messaged me and I just like my whole response was like a string of cuss words. And I was like, I am super mad at her. Like, I am. I don't feel like she was doing something selfish, but I also feel a little angry that she quit on us. You know what I mean? I understand where, as much as I can, where her head was at and all of those things. But I also like, there's some anger in there, or there's not so much now, but there was for a long time where like, how could you do that to us? And like, your kids are so sweet and little, and they will never forget this. This will never be something that leaves. And so I get some of that, I guess, with people saying that those types of things. I did feel a little angry. I felt very angry, to be honest, with her to start with. And I think the rest of it, I don't know if it goes away. I haven't gotten there, so I don't know. I don't know if it goes away entirely. And I don't blame myself completely for her death, but I think you always think about what you could have done.
What is that for you? Like
So,
what racks your brain at night thinking, "I could have done this, I could have done that."
so one of them was like, she came to my office and I wasn't there. And my mom told me my mom was working as my studio manager then, and she was managing my business. And she said, hey, Andrea came by. And I was like, that's super weird because she never stops by. That's crazy weird. So I just texted her. I shouldn't have texted her. In my head, the things that I think all the time are that I shouldn't have texted her. I should have gone to her house. I should have gone to her work. I should have found her wherever she was at because it was a red flag. I just missed it.
Because
I just
her
missed it.
stopping by was out of character.
Yes, it was totally out of character for her to come by for no reason. We called each other sometimes, we texted a lot. We came by for like specific things, or she was very considerate at being like, "Yeah, I'm coming over and I want to bring you something," or like that kind of stuff. So I think about that a lot. And the biggest one is just, it seems so obvious to me now, but I can't believe we didn't have a team, a support team. I can't believe we weren't talking to each other. All of these people who loved her so much. It boggles my mind now that we never spoke to each other.
It shocks me as well because I know within my own friend groups, if something's going on with one of us, we're all, like, somewhat gossiping about that person where there's like, "Do you know what's going on? Has she or he said this? Blah, blah, blah." So I'm surprised you guys weren't doing that.
The difference is we're not all friends.
Ah, so it's all individual friendships. You're not in the same friend group.
Yes, exactly. It's like her parents over here, there's her boyfriend and his group of friends that I don't really hang out with. She has like cousins and stuff that don't live here anymore and we're friendly, but I don't really talk to them a lot. She has her work friends, but they're not my friends, kind
Got
of
it.
thing. And so we have all these different
Keeps the
friend
isolation
groups.
pretty easy.
Yes. And I wonder, she was so smart. Like, I mean, she was valedictorian when she graduated high school. Like, she's very smart.
Wow.
She was very, very smart. I've wondered too if she didn't do some of that on purpose sometimes so that we all didn't know everything that was happening. Like, her parents didn't always know. Her sisters didn't always know stuff, but I knew stuff sometimes they didn't know, but they knew stuff sometimes that I didn't know. And so it boggles my mind that like that was never put together, that we never stopped and said, "Hey, what is the best way to help her survive her life and thrive in her life?" I don't know. It boggles my mind that we never came together and planned something.
What were the signs that everyone else was seeing?
When I started talking to people, it was exactly the same. Just that it got really bad for a minute, like really, really bad. And then like next day it's a complete 180 and she's happy. She's calling everyone, she's visiting everyone, all of those types of things. I mean, really classic signs of suicide is right there. Like this is happening. And because we just were a group that talked, I feel like that's how we missed it all.
You alluded a little bit before the kind of the main signs. What else are there? So you said like out of character, like giving things away, like tying up loose ends. That all makes sense to me.
Yeah. So those are like the big ones that come to me as we're talking about like suicide is happening. Like that's like an urgent find somebody, like something's wrong type situation. But if anyone ever comes to you and says that sometimes I'll laugh it off. I wish I was dead. Things like that. That's not a normal thing to feel. One of the things that was interesting to me is sometimes like when you're driving down the highway and you wonder what it would be like to drive in front of the semi coming
Mhm.
at you, that's also not normal at all. And so if somebody's talking about like questions that they have about that, or they're driving really fast and they're like, "I wonder what it'd be like to drive off that cliff," like that's a huge sign that they're having a problem and they need more support. Losing interest in things, not wanting to go out anymore, really closing themselves off to everybody else. So if they've stopped texting you and you can't get a hold of them anymore, they're not talking to anybody. All of those are signs of depression and issues that need a little bit more help.
Right, right. It all makes sense to me and everything you're saying, I've seen those signs in people before, people who I've definitely have worried about, and it's making me kind of think back and think maybe I should have said something. Thankfully, everyone I'm thinking of are still here, but times where I'm thinking, "Oh, maybe I should have kind of prodded a little bit more and asked how things are," you know?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a friend, she's also my book writing coach. She says that when her family goes silent, they have a policy that they show up. So, like,
Mm.
when someone goes silent, they physically show up at the door and they're like, "Hey, what's going on? How are you? What's happening? Why aren't you talking to me?" Whatever happens, because that going silent is like a really key indicator that there's something deeper that's happening and they're struggling through something big, even if it's just in their head, even if it's just a mental thing. It's a pretty good indicator for sure.
But once you get to that point where you recognize that someone close to you is struggling, maybe they've gone silent on you for a bit, yeah, you show up and just to double check on them, but we aren't educated or not trained in this type of crisis management. So like what do we do after that? Like do we get like people involved that actually know what to do? Do we kind of talk to our friend just say, "Hey, I think like you should go see someone," that kind of thing?
That's what I would suggest. But the biggest thing for me, because there's only so much I can do. I can't show up and be like, have to go see somebody and force them to see somebody. And it's really like a personal thing. But for me, I think a lot of it is continuing to show up. There's a woman that I know, Sheila, and she is a hospice nurse. And she talks about when she first meets a new family, they barely let her in the front door. And by the time you keep showing up and being vulnerable with them and allowing them to be real with you, you're the person that's on the bathroom floor with them while they throw up. And that's kind of, you have to be able to build that relationship and keep coming back so that they trust you enough to tell you these things and that you're not going to run away and that you're not going to do this. And that you can be the person who says, we're going to call the hotline. We're going to call the suicide hotline. We're going to do something. I'm going to help you. I'm going to go with you. Come with me and I'll make you an appointment. And they trust you enough to help with some of that stuff. I think continuing to show up, I think it's a really, really big deal because most people will stand at the door and pretend that they're fine. And you'll be like, they said they were fine, don't know what to do. But I
Like
think the
check box, like
continuing,
I checked in.
yeah, yeah. I think the continuing to show up and seeking them out and finding them. With my friend, I didn't, I just texted her and she was like, I'm fine. And I was like, okay, love ya, instead of like really showing up and doing it consistently. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we as individuals that don't have crisis management training can do.
What about her immediate family? You said she was married and had kids. They're around her at all times. And you don't think there was anything they could have done?
I
Or
think everyone makes their own choices in the end. And sometimes when people decide that suicide is their only option, I think they're smart at hiding it. And I think they're like, I'm feeling fine. I'm going to go for a drive.
mm,
And I don't think any of us can see the future enough to know for sure something would have happened. And I do think we still, even when we're at our worst, we still do make our own choices. And I don't think there's anyone to ultimately blame at all.
what did your life look like specifically when it happened and after it happened? And how did the aftermath look? Like, how did you get through the grief? I mean, you're still dealing with it. So, did you go to any like grief counseling or?
As you say that, I'm like, huh, interesting. I should have gone to see a grief counselor. Oh, I had a little photography studio like on Main Street then. And her cousin messaged me and she told me what happened. And I turned off all the lights in my studio and I locked all the doors and my mom left for the day. And I just stayed there and cried. It was the only place I could be alone. And my sister, she lived in Italy at the time. And there was a knock on my studio door. And there was just like a bag of chips and a container of salsa and like chocolate milk. That's how I knew it was from her. It's because it had the chocolate milk in it. And she just found someone to one of her friends went to the store and just left me like, I really care about chips and salsa. So they left me like my favorite things. And the chocolate milk is my sister's thing. And I sobbed and ate salsa. Like it was just a thing. But I pretty much shut everybody out. I have a hard time. Not everyone understands what that feels like. And people do, like you said, want to say that it was selfish of her and how dare she. And somehow that's supposed to help us is saying mean things about her, which doesn't help. So I shut everything down in my office. I had a big couch there. I laid on my couch for like 2 days. I probably went home occasionally, but mostly I just locked myself in my office because it was alone. And I called her ex-husband and we were really good friends growing up. And I talked to him about it. He came home just to go to the funeral with me. And I really leaned pretty heavily on him and his family. My husband's really great. He's a really great guy. He's really kind. He's all of those things, but he's one of those people who doesn't understand suicide.
Of course, not many people do.
And I just was not capable of answering people's questions about depression and the suicide and all of that stuff at that time. So I called her ex-husband and I was like, you have to come with me. I cannot go to this alone, but I can't take other people. Like I can't have people. I don't even know how to explain it. It's almost like they're watching you. You know what I mean? And I don't need people watching me, but I needed somebody who got it. And him and I worked so hard in high school to keep her alive, and we got it, and we knew what it took to have someone like that and to keep someone that depressed, like going and to be there for them and all of those things. And he was super kind and he came down and went with me. He would have come anyway, but he really just came with me and sat by me and just held space, which was like a really big deal. We didn't even talk that much. And then I live in a very small town, so everyone knew about it, everyone talked about it. I guess I probably didn't handle it that well. I pretty much locked myself away. There's one time I saw her family, her kids, and her mom at the grocery store, and I just had to leave. I had like a panic attack in my car and just stuff like that. It's just, I didn't do anything specific. I know that's probably what you want. Is like, what are the specific things that are helpful to
No,
people?
no, no, no,
I,
no. What I'm gathering from this is you still had to go get some kind of support for yourself, you know? Like,
yeah,
it seems to me since her whole life you spent so much time and energy and care trying to take care of her, it almost seems to me that you're still doing that even though she's not here anymore. Like, it almost seems like you're trying to protect her in a way.
possibly, yeah. It does feel like people are going to drag her through the mud and say horrible things about her. She wasn't a bad person
No,
at
of
all.
course not.
And so, yeah, it definitely feels that way. And so I guess I do close up. And I don't wanna really put it out there because I don't need to deal with people who are saying things like, "They'll go to hell for that. That was so selfish. It's not worth your grief." Whatever else they come up with, I don't wanna deal with any of that. And so, yeah, I do internalize a lot of it and just try to survive it.
You live in a more religious area of the States too, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You're in Utah, right?
Yeah, so,
I
everyone's
do know.
Mormon here.
I've never been, but I know a lot about it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I'm LDS too. And, there's so many good things, but occasionally people take church stuff in all different religions and kind of twist it to be their own thing. And it can be really, really hurtful.
And the hypocrisy of it all. It's they'll say right away that was selfish that she did that, but then the way they talk about her and what she did, it's like, what kind of like, you're not that.
Christian 101,
Yeah,
love your neighbors, man. What are you
right.
doing? Yeah,
Oh,
for
it
sure.
drives me
So,
nuts.
yeah, same. So a lot of it has just been like just this internal thing. A huge thing I do to heal, which I hadn't thought of till you said this, is I write a lot. I have things like up on her page, they kind of Facebook turns things into memorial pages when people pass away.
I
Things
think
like
it's very
that.
beautiful.
I think it is too.
Mm.
Things like that. I did a lot of service for her family. Of course, I am too wussy to face them and
Still?
talk to them face to face. I can see them now. It's okay. But like for a long time, it was like, I got presents for her kids for their birthday. We delivered her daughter's birthday cake. I sent someone else to do that because I'm a coward. Like random gifts for Christmas, things like that that make me feel like she would have done that for me. But writing is a huge outlet for me for sure.
Mhm. I think you're still harboring a lot of guilt and blame. Like,
Probably.
you're definitely not past it, and the reason why I know that is anytime I've talked about something that I've gone through, if it's triggering emotions for me right away, like, I'm not through it yet. But there's things that happened very traumatic in my life, and I can talk about them very openly with no emotion. It's like, "Oh, I'm okay with it now." But I don't know, in my opinion, there's still a lot for you to uncover.
You are probably right. I probably should talk to my therapist about it for sure.
It is. I mean, from what I gather from you, it's you spend so long taking care of someone and so much energy and time and years and love. And this is how I would feel if I were you. What was it all for? I still lost her. That's how I would feel.
Yeah, for sure. And the loss for her kids does weigh heavily on.
Hmm.
I mean, to lose your mom like that really, I don't know, that's something that really kind of hangs over you in my head.
Especially as a mom.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I have kids that are similar ages and that's a hard one for them
You can't
for sure.
imagine their life without you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a rough one for sure.
I know. My heart breaks for you. And like I said from the beginning of this conversation, it's not a current event, but it's still a current struggle.
For sure.
One thing that I read before is that you need to remember your loved one's life. That was way more than just the suicide, but sometimes people are like, that's what they focus on, and it's like, that was not their whole life. So, I know, like, anyone listening, if you had someone that has taken their life through suicide, you can't put all your focus on that last little bit of their life. They still had such a beautiful life before that, you know? The
Yes,
final act
definitely.
doesn't define their entire life.
Yeah. And we all do die eventually, and we are more than however we die.
Mm,
I love that.
exactly.
That was a good thought. Thank you.
Of course, of course. I want to ask you a few questions about the anger that you've dealt with before. You describe that as something you've overcome. And I know when I asked you about it before, you brought up the idea of this friend that we're talking about, Andrea. You hated one of her boyfriends, and it drove a wedge in between you guys. Now, is this the same boyfriend that she ended up marrying or completely different people?
She didn't marry him, but he was who she was with. That's the father of her children.
Got it.
The father of her children, he was with her when she died. So it is the same boyfriend. There was a husband in the middle, and then he came back around. Or maybe it was after. But yeah, it was like the father of her child, the guy she was with when she died.
And you always hated this guy.
Yes, I hated him a lot. He
This
was
is
one of
not
the
a new concept. I have friends very close to me that there's been guys that my friends have dated and whatnot that we have not liked, and we are not quiet about it.
for sure.
And it always ends up biting us in the ass. We lose.
Yes, every time. And so what happened is she started dating this guy. Again, I don't remember the timeline exactly. In high school, he was kind of a player. He was kind of a jerk. I didn't trust him. He'd done other things that I didn't approve of. And I felt like he was abusive. She never like came straight out and said it, but they had like their fights were epic and a big deal. And she was pregnant with this kid and they weren't married. And but I felt like he wasn't even taking responsibility for anything that was happening. And so I had a lot of anger at this point in my life, and I always felt like it was justified. You know, people talk about righteous anger.
Of
Like,
course.
if it's righteous anger, then it's okay. And so I was like, yeah, obviously this is okay because I'm right. And I was very vocal about it. I was vocal to him in public. I was vocal to my friends. I was vocal to her. I was vocal to everybody about how much I absolutely hated him and how she could do better. And she didn't need to stick around with him. And to me, that was support. In my brain that was full of anger, I was supporting her by doing that. I was
You thought you
showing her,
were fighting her battles and saving
yes,
her from things like you always
yes.
have.
I was showing her that I loved her and I was willing to stand up for her. And I did that through hating him in every way possible. But the reality is entirely different because to her, I'm forcing her to choose. I'm forcing her to choose me or to choose this guy that she's really in love with. And me sticking my nose in all of it and hating him is just putting this wedge between her and I. I'm forcing her between this guy who may or may not be a horrible guy and me. And she has to choose a side.
And we all know who they choose all the time.
Yes, all the time. Like
Never the friend.
she really loves him. And support isn't anger. Like that's what I learned. It's a huge reason I started deciding to write this book is that I really believed that anger was showing my support and anger was the way to get things done. And it's as long as I have good reasons, then it's fine. But all it
Passionate
did,
anger.
yes. But all it did was just drive this huge wedge between us so that, we talked about how we didn't run with the same circle of friends. A big reason why is because I didn't approve of the guy she was dating. I didn't like him. I didn't want him to be there. I was like, he's not allowed in my house. These really horrible things because I thought it was support. And in reality, it wasn't support at all. I wasn't paying any attention to her. I wasn't giving her anything that she needed. I was putting all of my energy and all of my focus on this guy and getting rid of him. And I wasn't paying any attention at all, not at all, but significantly less attention to what she actually needed. And that's a huge issue. And we do that with anger a lot.
If she's pregnant with his child too, like, he's never going anywhere now.
Yeah. Yeah. He's not, even if he's gone for a little while, like, even if she breaks up with him, it's not, they share a human being.
Yeah.
It's not over. And I just couldn't see through my anger. So, something really interesting about anger is your amygdala in your brain is kind of what chooses your emotions. Like, we train it to know what emotion match which situation. When we feel anger, it bypasses our prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal
We have
cortex is
no
where you make
logic
choices.
anymore.
Yes, exactly. And as it does that, and if you're not pulling it back, because we can be like, oh, I am angry, I'm going to pull it back. But if we just let our anger run away with us, it reduces our ability to think. It reduces our ability to take on more information. It reduces our ability to think creatively or to see any friends or allies. And it's like hyper focused. And that's exactly what's happened 1,000 times in my life with my anger. And definitely with Andrea is I was so focused on my anger, and my anger had taken over that whole smart part of my brain. And all I could think about was how mad I was at him and how horrible he was. And I couldn't take on the rest of the information she was giving. I couldn't take on everything else. I couldn't look at creative solutions. I couldn't look past it to still be a really good friend that maybe we all would have been communicating. Maybe we all would have been saying things. Maybe we would have been a little bit closer and she would have said something different to me that day. But I let my righteous anger drive a huge wedge between us so that we were still friends, but we weren't what we could have been.
In hindsight, what would you have done differently? You still don't want her to date this guy back in the day, but what would you have done differently?
In
He still
hindsight,
sucks is what I'm gathering.
yeah, to his credit, and if he ever does listen to this randomly, when she died, I didn't realize how much he actually loved her until she was gone. I didn't give him a chance because I was so angry. And maybe they were bad for each other at one point in time. But when she died, we used to sit up all night long and just message each other because neither one of us could sleep. And I was like, I've made so many mistakes and I can never fix this. Like, I can never fix it. It'll never be okay. And like, he got it. And he knew that I understood. And we just messaged each other like till 5 o'clock in the morning often because neither one of us knew how to sleep or what to do next or anything like that. And so, if I could do something differently, it would have been focusing on her instead. I don't know that I could have just loved him at the beginning and accepted him when I felt like he was being so mean. But if I would have been able to say to her, "What do you need from me?" and just focused on like being supportive, whatever decisions you make, I'm here for you. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here for you. And trying to get to know him and pulling her more into my life and being like a soft spot to land, I would have done that. I would have done something more like that was more supportive and less combative.
Combative is the word I want to jump on there because you've mentioned before that this theme has showed up in your life your whole life
Yes, for sure.
through friendships, through business, through family, as we were talking about probably earlier. And it's kind of dictated a lot of your life, right?
For
Like
sure.
you said, you have an addiction to anger.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. Like, were you an angry kid?
So I have ADHD, which means my emotions run really hot, right? And kind of extreme. There's a lot of extremes in
Fiery.
emotions. Yes. And so like I'm really, really happy and then I'm really, really and like when I'm crying, it's dramatic, like all of the things. I have a lot of emotions and they are like true blue for everyone to see all of the time. The other thing, so the thing about anger and all of that, so when I feel anger, I feel it a lot, but anger is also super stimulating. It makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel strong. It helps you focus. It feels, it's like a huge adrenaline rush, or it can be when
It
it's
is.
really a rush of anger. And it's addictive for a lot of people. And for me, having like such extreme emotions, it was easy for me to be like, this makes me feel good, so it must be right. Especially if I was like mad for like a good cause, like be nicer to this girl at school, or someone called one of my other friends a name. And I am sure he regrets that deeply, even to this day, because of the things that happened from there. But it didn't actually fix the problem. It's just like super awkward if we ever see each other and think about the things that I've done. It's just anger can be highly addictive to anybody because it feels powerful and it's like a hyper focus. And then you start to train your brain to think this is right. There's pathways in
There's
your
justice
brain.
to it.
Yes, definitely justice to it. And we just create these pathways in our brain that are like, this is right. This is right. Mine was like a super highway with my anger. I mean, it had like little billboards with things that are like, if I don't do it, then who? And if not now, when? And like my little fake team of people cheering for me. And like, I mean, super highway of anger. It always felt very correct to me. And I felt fueled by it. But it's really, in reality, and to everyone around you, it's so damaging.
I'm nodding
And
this whole time because I feel you. I get so much pleasure out of yelling and being angry. I really do.
oh,
And
yes.
being right and arguing. And I remember I was probably 19, 20 years old. I threw a guy down a flight of stairs, like a guy. And I'm not very big. Like I'm like 5'5". But the anger, whatever he was doing, the anger in me, I took him and tossed him. I didn't push him. I lifted him and tossed him. And I probably shouldn't be saying this in public on a public forum, but it is what it is. I did it.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like, it was like 5 stairs, like, whatever. But yeah, but it's, like, amazing how much strength and anger and the power that you get from anger. Like, you're right, it is freaking addicting. And I
Yeah.
always said to myself, like, I'd be a damn good lawyer because I would love to be in a courtroom telling everyone off. And that's
For
not the
sure.
reality of it, you know?
That's crazy funny because, like, one of my choices with my careers, it was lawyer because I enjoy that kind of rush and that telling people what to do and that debate when I'm right, but it's
It's
really bad for me
addicting.
mentally. Yeah.
It's winning an argument and being right is better than any drug I will ever do. And I don't even do drugs, but I'm telling you, this'll be a better one.
It feels that way, except it's not actually helping anybody. Like, I go back to
Helping no
Andrea.
it's all like, we're literally
No,
in our own little box being like, "I'm winning, like, I'm fighting the cause," but everyone around us are scared, don't wanna be around us, they don't wanna help us in any way, like, they're not
exactly.
listening, it's not getting us anywhere.
Yes. So a couple years ago, I was really politically involved in a situation that was happening in my county. It was like with land management and stuff. And I was like, oh, this like super online social media warrior about it. And I created a website and we had like an organization and we screamed at people a lot. And we went to some rallies and we did some stuff and we did all of it. And this is like 5 years later or something. And I look back and I'm like, wow, we made so many enemies and not a single person changed their mind. But in our heads, we were like, ah, we're so strong and powerful and doing things. But our anger turned more people away than actually brought them to us. Cause like, who really wants to approach 5 screaming women or whatever, or 25 screaming,
That's how we get
this,
names like hysterical.
yes. Yes, and there's a video of one of the women that I worked with, like, screaming at this other woman at the state capitol, and it was one of those moments when I was like, "Oh, this does not look the way you think it does."
This is not
'Cause
Bravo, honey.
yes, and, like, anyone seeing that wasn't like, "Oh, let's join that cause and learn more." They were like, "Ooh, so those people are crazy, and it's just not how you get anything done in the world," and it took me almost 30 years to figure it out, but in the end, that anger, as addictive as it can be, it's not actually making a difference. It's just putting more barriers in your way.
Well, we talked about this when we last spoke. I think that's one difference that I see with men and women in leadership. This is very gender stereotype right now, but from my experience in business, men are really good at keeping their composure and making changes through influencing rather than demanding, in my opinion. Whereas women, I personally, I can speak to myself, I get very passionate and can come off very angry and entitled and just want to be right and win. And it doesn't make any changes at the end of the day.
Yes, for sure. That's how I learned I was a bad leader.
Hmm.
I managed a pizza place when I was 16, which I was like, super proud of because I'm a manager. I'm 16. But it didn't mean I was a good leader. They asked me to do that because I was bossy. And leading and bossing is not the same thing. I had like full on yelling confrontations with my team in the back of that pizza place more than 10 times, like easily. It didn't make them loyal to us. It didn't make them do their job better. It didn't make them happier. It didn't make them better at customer service. It didn't do anything except create this huge rift in our team because I was so ready to fight. How dare you question me, and all of those things instead of learning how to lead. That anger that I took out on everybody and that I felt so justified in, it didn't do anything except I felt good if I made someone cry. And like, how bad is that to say? Like, how could you be proud of making someone else cry? Like, I must be the biggest jerk ever.
Because deep down, that's not who you are as a person.
Yeah, for sure. And I think most of us, even those of us who are angry, I don't think that we're out there to destroy people. We think that we're trying to do what's better and what's best for the world. And if someone has to cry along the way, it's fine as long as we're making a difference. But we're not really making a difference. You don't approach like a tiger that's roaring at you. You're like, ooh, great. I'm going to go the other way. This seems dangerous.
Hmm.
And I think that's how it all comes off. It's not good leadership. No one wants to follow someone if you're being screamed.
No. But I mean, so many people lead and manage that way with fear, and it's not good.
No, and it's not helpful.
When does your book come out again?
I'm hoping it'll come out this like in December, late November, but I'm a little behind if I'm being honest.
Yeah, this happens with books. But
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious, like we're talking about your anger addiction, but now you're writing a book that speaks to how to help people let go of their anger and hate people a little less, but also still make a difference. So if you're able to write about this, it means you figured something out. So can you tell us?
Yeah. So the biggest thing
Are
I
you
figured
an
out,
expert yet?
I hope so. We'll find out. The biggest thing is like, you and I talked about how I like to argue. We both like to argue. And winning an argument's a big deal. And I like to pressure, like if I could get someone to do what I want, that kind of stuff.
That's
Um,
addicting as well.
oh, for sure. And so I spent years and years doing that. And then Andrea died. And I'm like, oh, I can never repair this relationship that I broke. And then I met this group of women who were like super kind and loving and wonderful. And I was like, oh, so obviously you're not getting anything done in your life. Except that
Because
they
they were
were.
nice?
Yes. Cause it seems like to me, it's not very weak to be that kind. It meant that you're not
Ah.
getting things done. Except that they were doing exceptionally more than I was. Like changing the world, like making a real difference, like leading causes. And there was a man I met that was part of their group, and he like raised all of the money and built a hospital in the Dominican Republic to serve the Haitian people. And it's been like a really big deal. And he's helped thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. He does service mission and leadership trainings, and he has affected and changed the lives of more people than he can possibly count.
And he
And he
probably
did it
hasn't
by,
yelled once.
I've never heard him yell in my whole life. We've been friends for a while now, and like never ever has he ever raised his voice or said anything negative about anyone. And I just remember being like, this is insane. And so I spent like really the last 4 years since she died really studying my flaws and what I've done wrong and how to fix it. And this book is a lot about that. I don't calm down and not feel anger by counting to 10. Counting to 10 has
No.
never made me be like, oh, 10, I'm better now.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So I started creating things that worked for me. Like I have a series of questions to logic myself out of my anger, to figure out what is the best use of my time, what actually needs to be done to fix a problem like this. What steps can we take? What am I capable of? Who's already involved in this kind of thing? How do we fund this situation? And taking the passion that we all have to change the world and really channeling it into things that can make a real difference. The first thing has to be getting rid of some of our anger and being willing to listen to people, which is hard for me sometimes. So that's really what it goes through is the logic of changing your perspective and using your time well within your skills. And maybe we can't change the whole entire world, but if we're changing our community, if we're changing our country or our state or our whatever that is, that's still a really big deal. And the yelling online, and I've screamed at people on the street. I mean, I've done it all. It hasn't helped anybody at all. So that's really what we talk about and how to start setting that up and changing those pathways in our brain to not go straight to anger.
Well, there's a lot of truth to saying a kind word or a kind comment has a very beautiful domino effect. And the same
Mhm.
opposite, where it's like, yeah, you might make a kind of a rude comment that you don't think of about at all, maybe on Facebook or something about someone. And it's like, that's also a domino effect because that person's going to say something mean to the next. And it's like, this is how we get into such unjust issues in our world. It's as simple as that, in my opinion.
For sure. I totally agree.
Hurt people, and that's the issue.
Yeah. And if we feel defensive about things we're talking about, it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's how we divide so bad is we're not listening and we're not stopping to say something kind. I think we miss the power of kindness. Somehow in my head, kindness was always so weak. And I think it is significantly more powerful.
It is. To conclude everything we've talked about today, everything you've been through with your friend's suicide that you're still going through the grief, to having an addiction to anger, with all of that, any final last words or advice for anyone?
So my final last words, I'm going to sum everything up nicely. When we're kind and loving and accepting of people, they are more willing to help us than if we're yelling. And nobody wants to hang around people who are so angry.
I feel that. Trust me, I've learned a lot from this conversation of things that I need to take into my life. That's the ultimate goal, hey?
Yeah.
Kara, before I let you go, tell everyone where they can find you and plug your book for when it is published.
Okay, so I am on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and it's just Kara writes stuff. And my book is called How to Love People When You Hate Humans. And hopefully we'll have pre-orders ready for that in about November. You can find that on any of the social media and you can pre-order all of that stuff there. We have some free resources for you on all of those platforms as well.
Kara, thank you so much. Your vulnerability has been phenomenal. And like everything you're going through is still really raw. And I just commend you for just being able to still talk about this because I know it's something you're still going through. So I know so many people who have lost loved ones due to suicide. I know so many people that struggle with anger addiction. So I think there's a lot to gain from all of your insight and wisdom today. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.